Hey, this is Chris with Phoenix Gaming. Today we're going to take a deep dive into the War Bikers and Nobz on bikes. With the codex getting ready to come out, I thought it'd be kind of neat to look at some of the different units in the Ork index and talk about them. And we'll probably keep talking about them as we start seeing the codex and how things change and how the detachments work out. Standard format, we're going to look at the data sheet and we're going to talk about preferred loadouts, and then we're going to talk about different ways you could use the units, and if there's anything that could be done to really tweak or improve it or fix it. And then we're going to continue giving it our overall rating like we did with the Def Dreads. We are going to do it just a little bit different because we're talking about two separate units. We're going to do one and then we'll do the other. We're not going to do them both together. First, we're going to look at the War Bikers. Now, obviously, the boss knob gets an extra wound. The regular bikers are T6 and 3 wounds. So they actually have pretty good toughness. 3 wounds is pretty solid. They do have a 4-up save, which for orcs is actually pretty good, as kind of weird as that is to say. And then they have access right now to some good strats. They can get Arta's nails so that they can be -1 to wound. So a T6 and -1 to wound with that many wounds, unless people are throwing heavy bolters or anti-tank into them, you can actually keep them on the table pretty well. They come with either a Slugga or a Choppa, and then the Twin Daka gun. The Twin Daka gun is rapid fire 2. It's 3 shots base, 18 inches. So within rapid fire, you're getting 5 shots a bike, and they're twin linked. It's actually a pretty good volume of dice. If you've got 3 bikes, it comes out to 15, which honestly means you're going to average 5 hits. And for orc shooting, that's not the worst. The knob can take either a big choppa or a power claw. And then obviously you have a close combat weapon if you choose to take the pistol, but there's no reason to take the pistols. The pistols are ballistic skill 5. And then the datasheet ability is when they're within 9 inches, you improve the AP characteristic of their ranged attacks by 1. And that's actually pretty solid. Again, for an army that doesn't have a ton of AP, anything that improves their AP isn't the worst. And with the movement of 12 and the fact that their weapons are assault, you can actually position them pretty well to try to get around or shut off cover, things like that. So all in all, it's a pretty solid data sheet. There aren't a ton of options, like I said, and I would just give the boys choppas instead of sluggas. To me, it's just a waste when you've got something that hits on 5s versus something that hits on 3s. One's AP 1, the other's AP 0. They're both strength 4, and really they're both kind of there for the same thing because you can't fire your pistol and the DACA gun. So they're only really there to give you eligible to shoot while you're within engagement range. So I guess you could probably put a pistol on one of them just to kind of get a little cheeky secondary scoring capability that makes you eligible to shoot while you're within engagement range type of thing. I almost always give the knob a power claw. The big choppa it's just kind of a waste. Like we've got the free war gear that GW has continued to push this edition, and it continues to make certain weapons just fall by the wayside. Some armies really get hit harder than others. Tau in their index was pretty rough because it was like, why would I take anything but cyclic ion? Orcs kind of run into that also because for the most part, it's just like, I'll just take power claws. There's not really a reason to take a big choppa other than it hits on 3s. The power claws have the same volume. They hit on their -2 AP, so it's just if you throw enough dice, hitting on 4s isn't going to matter as much. I think the bikes are fantastic. Like I said, they're very mobile with a 12-inch movement. The 3 wounds for each bike, 4 for the knob, and their OC2. That means in a minimum squad, you're going to have 10 wounds, right? Because you got 3 for a biker, 3 for a biker, 4 for a knob. And at T6, like I said, and access to -1 to wound, they can actually stick around a little bit. Unfortunately, it's 3 or 6. I'd like to see maybe like a 9 option, but I know that's not going to happen. But all in all, 3 or 6 bikes is pretty good. I tend to run 2 or 3 units of them. Usually I run a big brick and then 2 small bricks for objectives. And they're around 23 points a model. And, because of their speed, they're also great for back screens, like backfield screens. because at a 12-inch movement with assault weapons, you can still advance them and shoot them. If you're on the wall, you can advance and charge them and shoot them. So they have a lot of versatility. I like to start them close to corners, especially if I think I might get investigate signals early. And, in search and destroy deployments where you can run up and grab that middle objective and don't have to worry so much about getting shot or grab the sides, one of the side objectives, I guess, really. It's one of those like a couple units of bikes are really cheap and they can be kind of tanky. So, they're not terrible for just torpedoing into the middle of the board for an early deploy teleport homers or trying to run up the sides of the board to snatch some cheeky objectives. So, like I said before, Art as Nails works on them. It does keep them alive a lot longer than they should. The 6-up invuln's handy. It's not crazy good, but with certain indexes and codexes, just having absurd amounts of AP when compared to others, it is nice to have. Like the Votan and the Tau books are just like super AP heavy, so just knowing that I can at least get a save is nice. And then having the assault DACA guns, fantastic. That means they can advance and shoot, which means they can advance and deploy homers, advance and investigate. They can even advance in grenades because they do have the grenades keyword. And that's awesome. A big part of this, like my game plan with how I build my lists, is most of my damage is probably coming from tank shock and battle wagons, and then also from grenades with all the units I have that have grenades. So it's one of those where the bikes just really fit neatly into my playstyle with the army presently. Hopefully, there's something cool in there in the codex when it comes out. We'll see. You could put them in reserves. I don't really see the need for it. Like, yeah, you could rapid ingress them, and maybe like a unit of Nobz is worth, but regular bikes just don't have the damage output to make it worth. Although maybe if you need something fast and you need that cheeky objective, but all in all, I think they're just better off on the table. Now we're going to talk about the Nobz on bikes. It is literally just the knob from the squad, but now it's in a unit of 3. Same weapon options for the most part. You can take Big Choppa, a Choppa, close combat weapon, a kill saw, power claw, and the power stabba. We're gonna kind of go through each one of these right now, and then we'll talk about the pros and cons of each one. The Big Choppa, you get 3 attacks at 712. The Choppa, you get 3 attacks at 511. And again, this is a perfect example of free war gear just being absurd. You do get a kill saw option. It does get 2 attacks. The Power Claw is 3 attacks at 922. The Kill Saw is at 1232. And then the Power Stabba is kind of interesting. It has Lance and it's Strength 8, Neg 1, 2 damage, but it hits on 4s. So that's one where it's kind of weird. Durability Drive-By Crumpin is actually pretty good. You get a 6-inch consolidation move. And, it doesn't come up often, but when it does come up, I'm very glad I have it. They're 125 points. You get 12 wounds with a 4-up save, a 6-up invul, and a 12-inch movement. A leader can attach to a War Bikers unit, then they can also attach to this unit. And that just means like you could put the War Boss on bike or the Death Killer War Trike into the unit. Doesn't matter. You can attach either one. What I like to see is, obviously you take the DACA gun, and the pistol is actually automatic. It's not an either or. You get the pistol, and I always forget that you get the pistol because, again, most of the time I'm not rolling it because if I'm shooting the DACA gun, and so I can't shoot the pistol. And if I'm engaged, sure, I could throw some cheeky pistol shots, but generally speaking, when they get engaged, they're not engaged with something that the pistols are going to really matter for. Looking at the war gear, like I said before, there's literally zero reason to take a Choppa. It's that whole free war gear conundrum, and I know there's other indexes that run into this issue. I know Drukari has it with the Talos, for example, and a couple other things where it's like, I would never take this. Why would I take 3 attacks hitting on 3s at strength 5 -1 damage when I could just take 3 attacks hitting on 3s at strength 7 -1 2 damage? It's one of those like it's just kind of an absurdity, and I just can't wrap my head around why it's even a thing, but it is. Looking at what they have, I just prefer claws. The power claws at strength 9, neg 2, 2 damage. It's just one of our best melee profiles. It's a good mix of strength and volume. I don't like that it hits on 4s necessarily. And I'd honestly argue that claws should go to strength 10 when the codex drops and then jump to 11 on the WA. But it's not the worst. Going from 9 to 10 is pretty solid. Hitting on 4s can kind of be poop, but you know, right now the current detachment does help kind of minimize that with sustained hits. And then if you put a character like the War Boss on bike or the Death Killer War Trike on it, you can give them +1 to hit, which does also help kind of balance that out. And then the characters also make them auto advance 6, which they also do for the bikes, but I didn't want to dig into the characters a ton yet. I like the Staba. I think it's really interesting. I actually ran a unit with the Staba at Tampa. I don't know. It's in a weird spot because -1 AP isn't that good, right? Because I can't charge it into a Land Raider and expect it to do any damage. And really, I can't charge it into even like a Rhino and expect consistent damage. But getting +1 to wound means I can wound a lot of things on 3s and 4s that I normally am wounding on 5s. So it's one of those, like, it's kind of in this weird spot. I'd argue that it needs to just hit on 3 plus. If it hit on 3s and then stayed at -1, or if it went to -2, but the Power Claw went to strength 10, I think those are changes that could really make both options pretty viable and still distinct and different enough to be like, okay, the Power Claw is always strength 10. I'm consistent. This thing's strength 8, and really it could probably just go down to 7 and get +1 to wound, and then just give an additional pip of AP, just something like that to kind of make it be more enticing. And I've mentioned this in the Death Dread video. A lot of the Ork data sheets are actually pretty solid. There's a few that are like the ability kind of sucks or whatever, but for the most part they're pretty solid. The issue isn't necessarily with the core data sheets; it's with the way the weapons were written and made. So as they are, I do think they're maybe just a touch overpointed. I don't think it's drastic, and it's really just because they can only come in a unit of 3. If they stayed at 125, but I could take 6 of them, I think it's fine. Like that's a good cost. But being locked at 12 wounds, they should maybe drop to like 115, 120 somewhere in there. Just like a 510 little drop for the unit. But it is still, just like the bikes, a great mobility unit, and it has every bit of utility that the bikes do. They just hit a bit harder. So for about 55 extra points, you get a couple extra wounds and you get more damage output, but you get the same utility because they have all the same keywords. You do trade in drive-by DACA for a 6-inch consolidate. And like I said, when I've needed it, it has been awesome because there have been times where I've gotten stuck with my ass in the wind out in the middle of nowhere and I can't touch an enemy unit, but then I can 6-inch onto an objective and just kind of pull myself out of line of sight. Actually, we just did a tournament, and one of my opponents, I was able to 6-inch consolidate and just wrap all the way around, like get around a terrain feature to tag the unit. And it was just like a unit of intercessors, so I wasn't worried about him beating me up too much. But it allowed me to snake around, engage him, and then he had to decide whether he was going to fall back and try to shoot them off the table, or if he was just going to stay stuck in. And it's one of those where either one was fine with me, because now I can at least prevent him from shooting me with multiple units. Like, it minimized the amount of shots he was throwing at those Nobz because of how I was able to tag things. I do tend to keep them pretty well hidden until turn 2 or 3, and I do that just because, again, I want to make sure that they get to go where they're going. There's certain matchups where they're just not great, and that just has more to do with the fact that, again, almost our entire index is capped at -2 AP. There are some exceptions like the kill saw, but I just don't think the kill saw is worth. I think the kill saw either needs to get an additional attack or an additional damage or something, because at 2 attacks, it's just not worth it. You can't orc math anything with it, especially on such an elite unit where you have 2, right? You have 3. You have 3 guys, and each one of them only gets 2 attacks, so that unit only puts out 6 dice. And that's not generally enough to do anything, but I could be wrong. And I'm going to be going to another tournament this coming weekend for one of my buddies is running, and I'll probably just run them with kill saws because it's more of a silly charity event, and that'll at least let me see how they interact. And like I said, I tend to keep them hidden. I tend to use them as if I can declare the wah, I will, and then just mash that gas and slam them where I want. I tend to give one of my characters the 2 extra inches of charging or 2 extra inches of movement so they can advance and charge 20 inches. And it's one of those where every game, man, every game I've played with them, people are just like, oh man, those things go really fast. And that's what I want. I want a couple units on the table where people are just like, I don't know how to hide from that. One of the things I am working on is using them more as a cleanup crew instead of an advon party. And what I mean by that is, historically I keep them and then I just slam them into something on the wall. But what I've started doing is trying to declare in turn 3 instead of turn 2. And I feel like that's been really helpful, especially for the bikes, because I can just kind of filter up junk units like the regular bikes or the commandos to kind of tag and tie things up. Battle wagons have done a phenomenal job of tying things up and then using them turn 3 to come in and kind of play cleanup. And like I said, T6, 4 wounds, 4 up save, 6 up invuln, access to Artist Nails. They don't necessarily evaporate, but man, if they take wounds, you're probably taking the damage. That's the thing to keep in mind. Both units have grenades. Keep that in mind. And assault weapons. I really like putting a War Trike or boss in with the Nobz. I already said that. The +1 to hit does mitigate the Claw's 4-up weapon skill. Auto Advance 6 is also sweet. 18-inch plus shoot and charge and grenades is nice. Honestly, it really is. And that's why, like I said, I may end up trying to run a unit with kill saws just to see how that goes. Because if I can advance, grenades, charge, I might be able to kind of work something out with the strength 13 coming out of them. It's only 6 attacks, but with 6's explode, you're going to average 5 hits. And you're going to wound most things at strength 13 on 3s. Because even a Land Raider or a Hecaton, you're wounding on 3s with 5 hits. You're going to put 3 to 4 through. And it's going to be a 5 up for 2. So they're on average taking like 6-8 damage. It's one of those, like, it's not great, but I don't know if the math on those is better than the math on a Power Claw. I'd have to sit down and actually work it out. Like I said, Follow Me Lads is fantastic. Going 14 inches, 20 inch when you advance and charge. It's a huge threat range. Your opponent has to respect it. Cunning but Brutal would be my second choice. A fallback shoot and charge with such a mobile unit means that, like, you don't have to get stuck in. You could charge something, and then if your opponent doesn't fall back, you could fall back, and then you can charge and do what you want to do. I think the War Trike, shout out to my buddy John. He and I have talked about this pretty much ad nauseum. And, he's right. The War Trike with the cyborg body is really funny because it actually has, I think it has 8 or 9 wounds, and it gives it a 4-up feel no pain. And then it doesn't even necessarily need to attach to a unit. It could just be a torpedo, but we'll kind of talk on that in a later video. Let's talk about how we can fix them. Honestly, the War Bikers are pretty solid. I'm curious to see how the new detachments in the upcoming codex will work with it. I don't know that they really need anything. I could make a strong argument for both units getting just a very minor points drop. But overall, the bikes specifically, the War Bikers specifically, offer great utility. They're decently survivable, and they have good strat support. I do think that the Nobz could do with maybe like getting a unit of 3 to 6, but I don't think that's going to happen. They are a Forge World unit, so they're probably not changing. And if they stay at 3 models only, like I said, again, maybe like a slight points drop. They're not terrible, and they offer some pretty hard-hitting melee, and they have good utility. There's just something missing that needs like that could just elevate them. And again, choppas need fixed on them. Stabbas either need AP2 or hitting on 3s. Basically most of the Ork melee weapons just need a rework. And I think most of the options in all the units are just kind of a mess. And that's why you just get like so much Power Claw spam in the Ork Codex, because when you look at what a big choppa brings to the table and you look what Power Claws bring to the table, not only like not only in sheer math does it just not make sense to bring big choppas, but it just like logically, like, you don't need to do the math to look at the two profiles and go, wow, one is really, really worthless when compared to the other. So Overall, War Bikers, great utility. They can put some damage on things like intercessors and elves and low toughness bodies just because they have decent volume and they are neg 1. They can tar pit some weaker units that will struggle to use or wound them, and that's also important. Assault weapons and grenades, and OC2 with a 12-inch move, T6 and 3 wounds. They're a pretty good mobile anti-infantry and objective stealing unit. Being able to just like advance grenade shoot or even advance grenade shoot charge, pretty solid. They're not going to be your crazy damage dealers, but they'll do some cheeky like they'll surprise people when you do all this stuff and they're just like, "Oh." And then Art as Nails, like I said, can keep them on the board. Overall, I give them 4 out of 5. And again, that's grading them based on the context of this index. I'm not trying to compare them to anything outside of the workbook. I think they have just a fantastic diversity in how they can be implemented. Nobz on bikes, like I said, I just think they're a little overcosted at around 42 points a model. We're looking again, you look at Mega Nobz, you look at Nobz on bikes, you look at things in this like 35 to 45. We're almost at that Terminator cost, the kind of points you would pay for a Terminator chassis. And, they just kind of underperform at that points level. The bikes do. And I've talked about this even with the Drukhari and the Grotesques. I know some people love Grotesques, some people hate them. Overall, this edition, I've just always felt like they were just like something wasn't quite there for them. And that's how the Nobz are. I don't think it takes much. I think if the melee weapons get reworked and or some kind of points adjustment, I think they spike up. Like I think with minor tweaks, they jump from like 2 to 4, but I do give them 2 out of 4 or 2 out of 5, and that's just until the codex drops and we can see if any of the weapons profiles get a rework, or if any of the detachments give them something that you're just like, oh, these are really good. But overall, they're a fun unit, and your opponent does have to respect them, and that is one of the things I do use them for, is just deterrent. Knowing that they can clear so much ground does cause people to be like, I'm going to respect the shit out of that. So, like I said, 2 out of 5. I'm still going to use them. I just took them to a tournament and had a good time. Came in third place, but honestly, my round 3 opponent forfeit, so it is what it is. And I'll touch on that in probably a stream video coming up. But basically, dude was just like really tired and, got to looking at my list and decided he didn't want to mess with it. And, it's just one of those, like, I was kind of sad because I wanted to play another game, and I did play another game, but it wasn't a competitive game. But at the end of the day, that's fine. Like I said, I ended up coming in third, and, the list is pretty silly, and we'll talk about that too. So, big shout out to my YouTube members, Kevin W. Appreciate you, man. Hatchlings, The Real Donnie G. Phoenix, Jamie. Immortals, Lord Wellingstone, Danny Boy, Captain Too Tall. Thanks for watching. Links on the screen, links in the description. Be on the lookout for some more old world content, some more orc content coming up soon.